Well, let's go to the Gospel of John together. We're going to be in John chapter 3, looking at verses 22 to 30. If you're using the blue ESV Bible and the seatbacks out there, you can find our text on page 888. We're in John 3, verses 22 to 30. The title of our sermon is Mission Accomplished. On March 20th, 2003, the U.S.-led military invasion of Iraq began as part of the opening phase of Operation Iraqi Freedom. The stated mission of this invasion was to free the Iraqi people from Saddam Hussein and to disarm him from his weapons of mass destruction. 6 weeks later, on May 1st, aboard the aircraft carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln, near the coast of California, President George Bush delivered a speech in front of a White House-produced banner that read, "Mission Accomplished." In this speech, whose title bore the same words as the banner, "Mission Accomplished," President Bush said that major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed, because the regime of Iraqi dictator Hussein is no more. Now, these celebrations notwithstanding, U.S. troops continue to fight in Iraq for 8 more years, eventually withdrawing in 2011, and then re-intervening in 2014. And President Bush's assertions of victory and the banner itself became controversial as Iraqi insurgency gained pace and developed into an outright sectarian civil war, with the vast majority of casualties on all sides occurring after the mission accomplished speech. Now, I think there are surely many lessons to learn from that war, but the relevant ones for us this morning regard the dangers of unclear or changing objectives and the perils of declaring victory too early. By way of contrast, this miscalculation by our president provides a useful foil to what we see in John 3 today, with John the Baptist and his own pronouncement of victory, his mission accomplished speech, if you will. And thankfully, he had a clear mission based on the truth, and he never let the goalpost move, even when pressured to do so. See, what we're going to see this morning with John the Baptist is that he understood some fundamental realities that motivated and informed his entire ministry. They kept him on task. They kept him on mission. And we must grapple with those same realities if we are going to fulfill our mission as a church here in Rincon, Georgia, in the year 2026 and beyond. So let me read the passage, beginning in verse 22. After this, Jesus and his disciples went into the Judean countryside, and he remained there with them and was baptizing. John was also baptizing at Aenon near Salim, because water was plentiful there. And people were coming and being baptized, for John had not yet been put in prison. Now a discussion arose between some of John's disciples and a Jew over purification. And they came to John and said to him, "Rabbi, he who is with you across the Jordan, to whom you bore witness, look, he is baptizing, and all are going to him." John answered, "A person cannot receive even one thing unless it is given him from heaven. You yourselves bear me witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent before him. The one who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. Therefore, this joy of mine is now complete. He must increase, but I must decrease. So I want to think together about mission fulfillment this morning. And there are just 2 points to make from this text. The first is that mission drift is a real thing. And the second, we can avoid it. Mission drift is real. We can avoid it. And with that second point, we'll consider some ways to do that. So the first thing is that mission drift is a real thing. And in layman's terms, mission drift is an organization's movement away from its intended purpose. Mission drift is allowing good but secondary, sometimes even bad things to become central things. Mission drift can be unintentional, often is. It can be intentional. But I want you to see it in the text. It seems that some of John's disciples were experiencing a bit of mission drift in response to Jesus' growing ministry. John had borne witness to Jesus, pointed to him, and then had kind of faded away after John 1. We see Jesus' ministry begin to grow. We saw in the last couple of weeks his conversation with Nicodemus and some reflection upon it. And after that, John, he focuses in on John the Baptist again. And remember, what we saw last time we saw John, in chapter 1, he had a mission. He was a self-aware sign. He was pointing to someone besides himself. He was a voice proclaiming a message of preparation for one who was coming, one who was greater than he. John had been sent by God to baptize the children of Israel, to direct them to this one, this man, this Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. So this last we saw John. Well, a few months later, several months perhaps, have passed by. And Jesus and his disciples have a growing ministry. They've begun to baptize. Now, John tells us in chapter 4 that it was just Jesus' disciples who were baptizing, not Jesus himself. But as this is happening, a discussion arises between the disciples of John and, John tells us, a Jewish leader, Jewish man. We aren't told, and we really aren't told anything about the discussion other than that it was over purification. And this leads John's disciples to come to him to point out this issue. Rabbi, teacher, he who was with you across the Jordan, to whom you bore witness, look, he's over there baptizing, and everybody's going to him. They seem frustrated. And we see that in John's response. He's offering some kind of corrective here. They're frustrated by these developments. They're not celebrating them. They're a little jealous. Right? John had done such a rock-solid job. He had kick-started Jesus' ministry. And now he's siphoning off disciples? John, you were the one who established this guy's street cred, if you will. And now everyone is going to him. They're experiencing mission drift. They knew that John had borne witness to him. But it seems like they had forgotten, or perhaps never fully understood, that that was the entire point. Isn't it so easy to make good things the main thing? Right? John's ministry was a good thing. But they had made his ministry the main thing. They had come to resent, to some degree, Jesus' growing influence. And so I want to ask us a question. What are the temptations that we face toward this kind of thing, toward mission drift? What are the temptations that we face to miss the point? What do we need to be on guard against? Well, there's probably a lot of things we could say, but I want to zero in on this. A danger for us is that we are a growing community. Now, that might sound weird to highlight in light of the fact that it's kind of the opposite thing that John's disciples were lamenting. But it presents challenges, right? On the face of it, a growing community is a good thing. But it can lead to an unhealthy belief that bigger is always better. But it can also lead to confusion over what we're doing, right, as new people come in. This church isn't very old, right? 36 years since it was founded. It's changed a lot in those 36 years. And some of us have been here for 25 plus years. A couple have been here for like 30. And some of you have been here for 5 months. And that's true in any church. But also true in any church is it's hard to get to know new people while maintaining relationships with longtime friends. It's hard to balance welcoming new people into our inner circles if we already feel like we don't have enough time for the existing relationships that we have. It's daunting to come on a Sunday morning and to look around and to feel like you don't know most of the faces that you see, especially if not all that long ago you did know all the faces that you could see. It's also daunting to come to church on a Sunday morning knowing that some to a lot of the people here have been here for 2 decades. And so in kind of both directions, it's hard to reach out. It feels overwhelming. I think related to this is, as we grow, a growing community can lead to mission drift through what you might call an increasing number of hobby horses. Everybody's prone to a hobby horse or 2 or 3. More people means more things to care about. And in so many ways, that is a blessing and a wonderful thing. But remember, mission drift is what happens when we fixate on secondary, even if important things, as if they're primary things. Right? Where you find your thing hiding under every rock and it's around every corner. We have a wealth of information at our disposal because of the internet. And that can be so helpful to sharpen and laser focus on a particular interest and really get to know it. But it can also drive us down rabbit hole after rabbit hole after rabbit hole, where we kind of come to see ourselves as the expert and our thing as the most important thing in the world. So a growing community with individuals and groups enabled by information overload to laser focus on important but non-central issues can be a problem if it leads to less and less clarity about what we're supposed to be doing or less and less charity toward other people. Think about it this way. What do you perceive as the biggest problem in the world, or better, as the biggest problem that we face as a church? What's the thing that kind of irks you that other people they're not quite as driven to think about as you are? They're not quite as eager to discuss, to act on. What's the thing that if we're not doing it as a church, we might as well just close up shop? Is it addressing youth and children, the aged, the poor, the rich? Is it patriarchy? Is it egalitarianism? Is it Israel, Iran? Is it human trafficking, abortion, domestic violence? Is it obesity, drug and alcohol abuse, immigration and multiculturalism, inner city violence, insane government policies at local, state, and federal levels? Or what's the thing that you right now cannot believe I didn't just name? Look, we ought to think about all of those things, and we need to think rightly about them and act rightly about them. We can't equally all care about them in the same way and be as effective in ministering in all of those areas. So we need to be merciful and charitable toward one another as we weigh out what are the substantial problems, what they actually are, and what we actually need to do about them as individuals, as families, and as a church, in light of what Scripture says and what our actual mission as a church is. And so, kind of tying up this first point, mission drift is real. And as a growing community, just like a waning community, we have things that we need to be aware of, that we need to watch out for. We need to be careful not to focus on the wrong things. And as we focus on things, to whatever extent that is, we especially need to be careful not to withdraw into our little enclaves of long-term friends and those who care about the same things that we do to the same degree, being tempted maybe to judge others who don't think like us. If we're not careful doing that kind of thing, to whatever extent we're tempted to do it, it could lead to a failed mission. It could lead to prematurely declaring victory, not realizing what the actual mission is. And so I want to now turn our attention to the actual mission. What are we doing and how do we stay on task? And so we see this, verses 27 to 30. Simply put, we're not central to the mission. The mission isn't me. It's not us. Christ is central to the mission. Our mission is to make disciples of Jesus. We are building His kingdom, not ours. And I would be certain there's not even really not a person in here who would disagree with that. So that's the good news. The other good piece of good news is that we can see here how that works out a little bit. And there are really two central truths that John embraces in these verses that helps him to stay on task with his mission, that I'm convinced if we can embrace these truths, we can stay on task in ours as well. And the first is this: Jesus was receiving followers, as John had, because God was giving them to him. That's the first thing that John knew. The second thing is that John is not the groom. He was the friend. Another way that we could put these two truths is that John was embracing gratitude and humility. Gratitude and humility. First, we see John embracing gratitude because he recognizes a person can't. He's got nothing unless he's received it. A person cannot receive anything unless it's given him from heaven. This is a mark of gratitude. He doesn't say the word thanks, but he realizes that his ministry and Christ were gifts from God. He knows that whatever he had previously was from God. And now whatever Jesus has, he says, that's also from God. John isn't bent out of shape because people are flocking to Jesus. So he's grateful, but he's also humble, right? I'm not the groom, he says. How strange would it be to go to a wedding? Horrifying would it be to go to a wedding, and the best man steps in front of the groom. Even if it's just during pictures, not the ceremony. Right? He's not the center of attention. The best man, he's not the person that people have come to see. It's the people getting married. It's the bride and it's the groom. And so like these two things, they go together really well. Gratitude and humility. Humility leads to gratitude, and gratitude leads to humility. Right? The grateful person, the humble person isn't easily perturbed even if he wanes in influence. He's not perturbed when the leading man enters and comes center stage. But this is something really, really important to miss. So those are two truths that he embraced, not merely at the level of what he knew. It's not simply enough to know Jesus had this ministry because God gave it to him, and I'm not the groom. John's disciples knew that at some level. At least the second part, they specifically mention it here. You bore witness to this guy. They knew he wasn't the Christ, John. But it doesn't seem to have penetrated their hearts. They knew the truth, but they didn't cherish it. But John did. And you can see the humility that grows out of that. It runs much deeper than you might think. Look at how he says this. Verse 29. The one who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. When you think about that for a moment, his use of the word voice here, does that make you think of anything? Does it make you think of anything John has already said in this gospel, John the Baptist? What did he say in chapter 1? What did he call himself? Hey, man, who are you? Are you the Christ? Are you the prophet? Are you Elijah? No. Well, who are you? I am the voice crying in a wilderness. He's the voice, but it is the voice of the bridegroom that he longs to hear. It's now time, he says, for the voice crying out in the wilderness to grow silent, and for another voice to grow louder. John, the voice, gives way to the voice of the groom, the voice of the good shepherd, whose sheep hear him and recognize him when he calls. And look at his assessment. Jesus has what he has because God's given it to him. I'm not the groom. I am fading away, but Jesus is growing, and he says, my joy is now complete. He must increase, but I must decrease. John had accomplished his mission. People are going to Jesus. John's going to recede into the background until he is arrested and executed at the whim of a dancing girl. A few months ago, when we were corporately reading through Mark's gospel, we got to, I think it was Mark 6, where John the Baptist is executed. I remember I nearly burst into tears listening to that account as we read through it. I was struggling with an overwhelming sense of grief at the absolute tragedy of John's life. John was the forerunner of the Messiah. He was the greatest of the Old Testament prophets. And how does that work out for him? He's murdered. He's imprisoned and then murdered by the cowardly Herod. And his head, once it's severed from his body, is brought as a gift to Herod's lover and her daughter. Some legacy. But here's the paradoxical message of hope. His life wasn't wasted. And I could mostly remember that then. But in reading this week, it was brought fresh to my mind. John had completed his mission that God had given to him. He had prepared the way for Israel's Messiah. True enough, John is going to have some questions later on, after he's arrested, before he is killed. He is human. But John 3, 27 to 30 stands as his mission accomplished banner. But he got it exactly right. He knew what his mission was, and he rightly declared victory. The bride was going to the groom, and the friend's joy is complete. So what about our mission? Because there's some ways in which we're similar to John, but there's some ways in which we're a little dissimilar. So remember, our attempt to particularize our mission of making disciples of Jesus here at Redeemer Baptist Church goes like this. Redeemer Baptist Church is a family of faith that exists to worship God with joy, to love our neighbors, to see transformed lives, and to send and be sent for the spread of the gospel through Jesus Christ. And so I want to ask two questions of that mission statement with John 3 in mind to help us avoid mission drift. First, what are we doing? Second, how should we do it? First, what are we doing? Well, we exist to worship God and to love our neighbors. That's simply restating the two great commandments. Love God supremely, love your neighbor as yourself. If you were here back in 2024, the very beginning of it, before Genesis, we preached a series on the values of our church, and this touches on the first two, to offer to God acceptable worship and to demonstrate lawful love toward our neighbors. So this means that at root, we are here to worship the one true and living God, to not worship other gods. We're to worship God according to His prescription, not according to the machinations of our own thinking. We're to conduct the totality of our lives in such a way that honors the Lord, whose name we bear. And we're to conform our lives to the pattern that He set for us in creation and redemption by working 6 days of the week and resting one day, Sunday. Now, so we gather for weekly worship to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. We're to honor rightful authorities in the world, to defend life, to promote faithfulness, generosity, and the truth. And we're to love our neighbor not by behavior modification, but from the heart. And we do these things as God works in us by His Spirit to transform us, to make us to be like Christ. And of course, we have a particular burden to see the gospel flourish here in Rincon and the surrounding towns and counties, but we also care to see the name of Christ and His gospel magnified in all the world. And so those hobby horses that we might have, they're important. Because loving God supremely and loving our neighbors as ourselves, they need to be worked out in particular ways. But none of those things is coextensive with the mission. We'll all find some of them as more immediately pressing than others in terms of how we love God and how we love our neighbor. That's what we're doing. How do we do it? How do we do that as a family of faith? Well, our mission statement helps here quite a bit. The first thing to see is that we do it with joy, right? We worship God. How? With joy. Now, of course, joy should characterize all that we do, not just worship, but it particularly describes our worship of God as we make Him our greatest treasure, as man exists to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. That doesn't mean that we're always upbeat. Does it mean that things are always easy? Does it mean that even we're always smiling? We can be sorrowful, yet rejoicing. So we're joyful worshipers. But I want to add another word that it's not found in our mission statement, but it is implied. How do we love our neighbors? One way we've said it is through the demonstration of lawful love. And I want to emphasize a different aspect now. Jesus says in John 15 that no one has greater love than that he lays down his life for his friends. And so following Jesus' example, we love our neighbors sacrificially. We give of ourselves for their sake. So our mission is to make disciples of Jesus through joyful worship and sacrificial love. The desired effect of that is that we and those we meet would be transformed to reflect, increasingly so, the character of Christ as we go across the street and across the world with the hope of this gospel. Now, next week we're going to consider a little bit more some of these ideas in verses 31 and 36, particularly how God as Trinity undergirds our mission. But I want to land the plane now on verses 22 to 30, and I'll close with three areas of application for your consideration. First, your personal lives. And most of this is just like searching questions for you to consider. Where are you drifting personally? If you are. Where are your affections being drawn toward worldly things? Where are you putting your agenda above the Lord's? Where are your thoughts fixating on important but not primary issues? Where maybe you're tempted to make that issue the litmus test of the faithfulness of everyone around you. Where are your thoughts leading you to sinful frustrations, anxieties, or fantasies? What choices are you making that are proving to be unfruitful and unproductive for the sake of growing in grace, growing in communion with God and with His people, for the sake of seeing His kingdom advance as people around you believe on Christ and are reconciled to God and to one another through the witness of your life? So those are some things to consider personally, but working out a little bit. What about your family? Do you see your family as more than just a collection of people who happen to share the same last name? How are you as a family working together for your mutual joy and flourishing and for the joy and flourishing of the people around you outside your home? Dads and moms, are you committed to constant Christian discipleship in your home? Right? Like, our children are being discipled by someone into something. Is it you primarily? Children, kids, teenagers, are you diligently aiming to learn from your parents how to walk faithfully with the Lord, to live productively in His world for His glory? And third, what about our church? Where have you allowed hobby horses or the difficulties of growth to keep you from committing to life at RBC and this mission of making disciples of Jesus? Where are you in terms of church life? Are you living on the fringes? What keeps you from moving in? What are the barriers that at whatever level need to be addressed? Whatever difficulties might be there, and I trust for many of us that life together is incredibly sweet. But life can be difficult at times. And so would you commit with me now to worship God with joy, to love our neighbors through sacrifice? And those things can be worked out even more concretely, but they're pretty clear in terms of what we need, like what they are. They're going to work out a little differently in our lives, but if we do those things, if we love God, worship God with joy, and we love our neighbors sacrificially, we can trust that by God's grace, we will see transformed lives, both here in our own community and around the world. I want to think about this growing community thing. And I want to put it in kind of a paradoxical way as we look at verse 30. John says, he must increase, I must decrease. What does it mean for us as a church to decrease as we grow? Does it mean that we shouldn't grow? Does it mean that the pastor spends every week praying to see less and less people each week? Just praying for more empty chairs? No. Decreasing and increasing here, it's fundamentally disposition of the heart toward God and toward others, rather than a specific head count on Sunday mornings or dollar count in the bank. A church could be shriveling and dying and totally increasing. Absolutely focused on promoting itself, setting Jesus on the back burner. And vice versa. We can decrease even while growing in so many ways, including numerically. How? Well, I want to recall with you those two character traits of John that need to mark us as a decreasing people, whatever attendance numbers, membership roll, and weekly offerings look like. So, gratitude. When we consider one another, when you consider Redeemer Baptist Church, the people and the resources, are you struck with thankfulness that God has given us the things that He has and the people that He has? Like, can you look around right now, just glance around at the people sitting next to you, and just be awed that God would bring us together? Our similarities, our differences, our strengths and our weaknesses, our sins, our shortcomings, and our obedience, all of those things. When we consider one another, do we rejoice or do we grumble, either in our hearts or maybe with our lips? Do I grumble about who I'm seeing or what I'm not seeing, who I'm not seeing? Is my impulse consistent thankfulness as it concerns life at RBC? Or is it complaining? There's nowhere to sit, the bathrooms are too small, the sound booth is in the way, the campus might be a bit poorly designed, the sermons aren't that great. It doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about problems or address them in a timely way. We should, but ingratitude is kryptonite to churches and to the Christian life itself. And so if we're going to be the kind of church that decreases but doesn't shrivel up and die, we need to be grateful, but we also want to be thankful. That's same thing, actually. Gratitude and thankfulness, same thing. Humble. Can you humbly rejoice even when others seem to be flourishing more than you or more than us? Now, I don't mean like any time you ever learn that someone goes to another church, no matter what church, that you should just be jumping for joy. Like, there truly are churches not worth going to. And there are places that call themselves churches that aren't. I think this is a really great church. I can't believe that I get to be a pastor here. And I also recognize that there are other really good churches around here. with faithful people and loving pastors. Right? There have been people who have attended here for a time, even come to a membership class, but decided not to join. What's the gut reaction when that happens? Is it frustration? Is it to think that we're better than wherever they ended up? Is it to cast some secret judgment on that person or family? Well, they're obviously not as spiritual as I am. They went to that church. Brothers and sisters, we're not central to the mission as individuals or even as a church. We're like John in that we're signposts, pointing away from ourselves to the only Savior sinners, pointing to the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, pointing to the bridegroom who purifies his bride, washing her with the water of the word, and in a way that we're sort of similar but different from John in this whole thing is that we're the bride. We're not just pointing people away from ourselves to Jesus, but we're going to Jesus ourselves as the bride. And so, I pray that we would grow here as a church deep and wide. Spiritually, numerically, monetarily, whatever. All of that. Yeah, I pray every seat in this room would be filled, that this baptismal would be filled basically year-round. At least every month. I want small groups popping up all over Effingham County and beyond. I want families. I want you to flourish, to have happy and holy and productive lives, and to plant churches across southeast Georgia. And I want to be, not just me personally, but all of us together, so enamored with Jesus of Nazareth that no matter how big or how small we are, how much money we have or don't have, how functional or beautiful the campus is or isn't, what cultural issues do or don't exist in our county, so enamored with him that we are increasingly marked by joy and sacrifice, by thanksgiving and humility, as we decrease every week. Maybe that's a new marketing campaign, the decreasing church. Let's decrease every week, every day, as Christ grows larger and larger and larger in our eyes.